All right. Hello, everyone. Today we have our lecture on computer vision and deep learning, and Elena Sizikova is going to present it for you. She is a faculty fellow in the Center for Data Science at New York University. Elena, please go ahead when you're ready.
Thanks for the introduction, Ilya, and thanks a lot for everybody for attending this talk. So I'll give a brief introduction to deep learning, to computer vision problems, everything between the two. And I see the chat, so if you have questions, please ask, and then there will be also time. I will try to stop between the different sections, and also at the end if you have any questions. Please don't hesitate to ask. So today, I would like to cover a couple of different topics. I want to start with some definitions. What is computer vision? And cover neural networks, which are kind of models that people use very often right now in computer vision because they achieve very good computational results. And specifically, I want to look at convolutional neural networks, what these are, what are their building blocks, how do you make them, what do you need to do to actually go from a Python notebook to a neural network for computer vision, let's say classification task. And then we'll end with some history and applications in CV. And so some of this work will be, some of these topics will cover some of the material from the labs and kind of set a foundation for future lectures in the AI school. So to not lose momentum, so what is computer vision? The idea is we want to extract information from images and from video. So what do you see in this image right now? So I'm not a movie buff, but I think this is James Bond, and I think he's drinking a glass of something, and maybe there are something in the background. Maybe I'm not sure if it's a door. It's a little bit difficult to see. So the process in computer vision is to try to figure out the information that I just told you from the image using a computer or a computational model. And so why is computer vision difficult? Well, so for me and for you, it's easy to look at the image and kind of interpret it. But for a computer, we're just looking at an array of pixels, like you see the one changing here. And so from that, it's very difficult to extract any semantic information. So information that says something about what you observe. And in particular, in neuroscience, cognitive science research, have actually found out that the visual cortex, so the part of the brain that looks at kind of images and interprets them, actually encodes a significant portion of the brain. So it's a challenging task for the human brain, it's a challenging task for computers. And so it's something that is important, and a lot of resources are dedicated to. So look at this picture briefly and just think about what you see here. And so this is an example, one of those illusions. So you may see different things, and if I tell you what to see, you'll probably see it immediately. But if I don't point it out, then you will not see it right away. Okay, thanks. So Adnan sees a dog. Do other people see the dog? Maybe now, after we have pointed this out. See a man struggling, a cow. I don't see the cow. Okay, I missed maybe the cow. I see a dog too. A tree, maybe some trees, face, leopard. Any other random guesses? Okay, face. Okay, so everybody sees different things. So I see kind of some clutter, maybe some, I don't know, dirt, but after somebody has pointed out, then I see the dog. So you could see the kind of dog if you see my mouse here. So you can see the dog outlined here. Maybe some trees here. I don't see the face, but anyway, so again, if I if you traced out the outline, then it's so much easier to figure out what you see. But so the point of this exercise is to show that it's also an ambiguous task. So you can look at the same image and you can produce different predictions of what it contains. So if even we cannot figure out what the image contains, then can you imagine how difficult it is for your computer to do it? So typically images that are encoded into arrays of pixels. And so because these arrays may be difficult, let's say in here, it could be encoded into a 1000 by 1000 by 24 bits array. It's very difficult to process this much information. There's lots of ambiguity with respect to things like shadows, texture, highlights, physical properties. And so there's kind of lots of things we need to encode. We need to process it fast, and this makes this task challenging. And for computer vision, so basically performing this analysis task with computational models, we need to think about how do we model images, how do we represent objects in those images, how do we interpret this, what algorithms do we use, and sort of what biases do we, or some priors do we want to consider in understanding these images. So all of these components form the research field of computer vision. And in terms of where it is used, well, it's used in lots of different applications. For instance, in autonomous driving, you want to prevent collisions. You want to know where you're going, sort of, and in general in autonomous applications. For health, maybe you want to diagnose certain diseases and kind of help medical professionals identify certain parts. In security cameras, where you're kind of, and surveillance, where you're trying to monitor what's going on. In access camera models, in search, like Google search, you're searching for images, probably using a computer vision algorithm in the back end to sort images. And for some, fun artistic applications, anything that has to do with images, there's probably some computer vision involved in somewhere in delivering kind of and analyzing images that are shown to you. So next, I want to jump into neural networks, and I want to point out that computational models that are neural networks achieve very impressive performance in various tasks of computer vision. For instance, in synthesis, so there are some works you've probably seen, Deep Dream. Some of the prior works on that is Ballion-Gattis from CVPR. So CVPR is one of the kind of main conferences in computer vision. But here the idea was to try to have the kind of image on the top look like the Starry Night by Van Gogh. And so you can see that the merge of the two images, which is kind of part of computer vision called synthesis, looks similar to both images. There are other tasks like segmentation, the famous cats. So cats are used as an example in computer vision very often. How do you find out the regions of the image that show a cat? And of course, classification to explain what the image contains. So all of these popular tasks are most commonly right now solved by neural networks, because there's lots of data and neural networks take large amounts of data, kind of learn a model from them and output the result. And in particular, there has been kind of a trend. And so this is an old graph that shows that as different architectures evolved in 2015, kind of a specific model actually beat a human on the classification task. So in short, convolutional neural networks are extremely popular models right now in computer vision. Now, what are convolutional neural networks? So they consist of several building blocks: convolution, pooling, fully connected layers, and nonlinearities. And so basically the idea is that we slide the filter through the image and then try to compress the input image into some feature representation at the end. So this is my input image, sliding convolution. a sequence of layers. And then at the end, for instance, for the classification task, I get the output of probabilities that say whether the image contains a dog, a boat, a cat, bird, or none of the above. So I would like to now talk about the different building blocks and kind of explain or give an overview of what they are and what they are mathematically and how are they typically put together. And I have the chat open. So if you have any questions, please just reach out. So building blocks. So my input image, first I want to try to explain what is a convolution and how does it work. I want to mention that here I'm assuming my image is kind of a grid of pixels. Let's assume that it's a grayscale image, so it has every grid position has a kind of a grayscale intensity value. So every point in the kind of this grid has a value, and I'm trying to apply a filter to it and to produce a kind of a new value in the feature map. So again, this is my grid, and I'm sliding my filter, which is kind of a rectangular piece of values, and trying to apply it to a region of the image and obtain a new value. So this grid of weights is called like a kernel, and the weights of this kernel are learned through the process of the neural network, which I will describe in a little bit. But for now, you can assume that kind of we have a set of weights. So I've slided it a few times, and now, so basically after, oops, sorry. Two monitors setup. After sliding it multiple times, I obtain a feature map. So for every position where I have centered my kernel, I obtain a place in my feature map that a value, right, from the weights. And so what's next? So next I take another set of learned weights, so another kernel, and then get another feature map. So in my convolutional layer, so here's my image, and here is the visualization of my filters. And visualization of my filters, and so I'm kind of sliding it multiple times, and I get the resulting feature map. So here in this visualization, my kind of the weights of my filter are kind of, the filter is kind of diagonal, and after kind of sliding it, I get a feature map which looks like the one on the right. So it may be resized a little bit to match the resolution of the image, or maybe kind of depending on the step size, which is a stride, I get a different kind of number of output pixels in the feature map. So I'll answer the question live, Ilya. So we have a question: when first training the neural network, how do we determine the first set of weights, or is it randomly determined in the beginning? So this is a great question, right? So first, we will define an architecture, and we will say what is the size of this kernel, kind of the width and height, what is the stride, so basically the step size and other things for every layer. So I will define the architecture, and I will initialize it with, let's say, random weights or with some distribution, and then I will apply it to my data set, and I will use kind of gradient descent or some other optimizer to train. So the short answer is we initialize things randomly in the beginning. Another question is, how are you calculating the weight of grayness in its image? So the weight, so the kernel weights are here, and these are the randomly initialized ones. the initial kind of the input is like what is the kind of, let's say in this position, what is the value of the pixel, the intensity, right? And so I'm applying kind of, I'm taking the dot product of kind of this patch with what the kind of kernel is, and then kind of producing the feature map value. So it's basically the intensity is defined in the image. And so the idea here is that we are kind of trying to slowly kind of obtain multiple feature maps, apply multiple filters to it, and slowly kind of produce a different learned representation of the image that is used then for classification or for something else down at the end of the network, the bottom of the network. So of course, every one of the K filters here would produce a different feature map.
Before you move on, I think there are two questions. One is in chat, and the other one is the question is it fair to say that you're calculating the weight of grayness in the image?
Well, so the weight of the image grayness, the intensity is defined, right? That's like what your image is. Like, for instance, if there's a cat in a particular pixel, then that value will be fixed. It's the input.
Got it.
And
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think I was just going to say, if it's not clear, then maybe the participants could unmute themselves and clarify. We do have a raised hand, so meanwhile I can.
Yeah, please just unmute. That would be really helpful. There's another question in the chat. So what does the filter do? I try to answer it. If you need the clarification, or if I didn't answer it correctly, let me know.
I thought someone raised a hand, but maybe they put it down again. So if there's a question, please feel free to raise your hand.
Okay. So imagine that. So we're not applying matrix multiplication. We're applying kind of dot element-wise product of like a smaller matrix with a larger matrix. Smaller matrix being the kernel, and larger matrix being the input image, right? And we're taking this element-wise product at every point, or like spaced out point in the input, and then producing these K feature maps. So for every filter, we get a feature map. So what happens next? So what is stride? Stride is exactly this step size that you use to kind of do I move to the next pixel in the image, or do I move 2 pixels away? And so the step size is again a parameter that you use to define in the neural network architecture. So fortunately, as we work in computer vision, there's lots of, because it's so popular, there's lots of exciting demos that you can find. And this demo I took from a website. You can visit it later. So here it shows an input image. I'm here, it's kind of the values here are shown sort of like this is the pixel where I'm centering at. So here I'm using a kernel of size 3, and the kernel weights are fixed. So as kind of in the video, as we're moving the cursor, the pixel values and the neighboring values change, and so we get a output feature map with values which are encoded by intensities in this image. So you can visit the website and kind of look at this demo one more time if you'd like. It's publicly available. And so I want to show some examples of filter visualizations. So these are often used to show kind of what the model that you looked at has learned. So these are kind of cool to look at. So a lot of the filters at kind of the earlier parts, upper parts of the network encode things like edges. And as we go down in the network, we find kind of more convoluted patterns. So here there are some circles, faces, and so they encode kind of more part-based or object-based information. Some more things. There are some. So they're not necessarily human interpretable, right? They can, but they are sort of, they show some, so they have some sort of object part, or something kind of some circular filters, or some geometric object that they're, or geometric part that they're trying to capture. There are some more visualizations here. So we have a question. So the one in the middle in the kernel, right, in the cup image. So I'll briefly go here to this demo. So this kind of is the value of the, so this is my kind of patch. I don't know if you see it, there's a little square here. So there's a little, so the middle value would be, the intensity width is 0.14. And let's say the upper left would be 0.12, and so on. Then another question, is pooling necessary to capture more convoluted features? So we haven't gotten to pooling yet, right? But it's necessary to basically reduce the size of the network. Why is the output 64 by 64? So it's a result. So if I'm sliding the kernel, right, then you kind of with stride 1, then you will see that eventually I will have, so stride 1 will be that I'm not skipping any patches. You will you will find out that actually sort of not to go outside of the image, sort of not to consider borders, the output will have to be 62 by 62. It's just linear algebra. Then another question, how do you find the position of the patch? Well, I'm applying it to all of them. So I'm just sliding this box as we've looked at the demo. I mean, here, so I guess in the demo, it's kind of visualization, so it's moving kind of arbitrarily, but in the neural network, I will just be sliding it like here, as seen here. Okay, so, and again, so with convolutions, it's something that sort of and with any of these layers, they're actually relatively simple. So just you can play around with them, understand the basic math, and many of them are implemented in kind of public or like frameworks that you use for deep learning. So you will not actually have to implement the sliding and things like that. So you just need to define these parameters such as kernel, stride, and at least for convolutions, and the library will do this for you. So I want to move on to fully convoluted layers, fully connected layers, and so they're actually very similar to convolutions, except they have more connections. So mathematically, you can encode them kind of as kind of multiplication, but if you look at sort of what happens, so I'm basically, instead of saying I will only take a patch, I'm saying that my input is actually just an array, and I'm connecting and I'm applying a weight to every single one of the kind of the values and producing an output. So it will be, so the kernel size of the fully connected layer will be the size of the input image, essentially. so this would be my visualization. So in a convolution, I would apply a filter, and you can see that I'm only connecting kind of 9 of the values, because my, so 3 by 3, because my filter is 3 by 3. So convolution would have significantly less parameters. And because for every kind of patch I'm applying the same convolution, then sort of, again, I'm saving space, also not keeping the weights of the kernel. Now in a convolutional layer, all of the pixels would be, so here would be 16, I mean 20, so 6 by 6, 36, not all 36 are shown. So if I was going to apply a fully connected layer, I would have kind of a, as I mentioned, filter size of 6 by 6 to produce every output. So you can see that fully connected layers have kind of more representation power. However, they're also more computationally, like require more space. Okay, so what's next? So next is nonlinearity. And so what is the intuition here? So before we had 2 linear layers, convolutions and fully connected layers. And so if we had just a collection of these layers, then your network will be linear. And so there's not quite sort of, there's many functions that are of course nonlinear. And so if we only use linear layers, we will not be able to represent kind of such a variety of different functions. And neural networks are essentially functions that we're trying to capture and learn. So what do we do here? We have these layers which are rectified linear units, maybe leaky ReLUs, or there are some other forms, and we would intersperse them in between these linear layers to achieve nonlinearities. And so the most common one is a ReLU, and again, so this is kind of the function that we apply. So for every point kind of in your input image or input feature map, you will kind of apply the ReLU. So you will take out all of the negative values and replace them with zeros. Now, when I'm saying here an input image, right? So like at the very top, it's your input image that is fed in, and you're applying convolution. After nonlinearity, you can also, once you apply a pooling, which is essentially a downsampling of your map, you are applying another feature map. So at this arrow here, you're like the feature. So the input to the next convolution, which will probably happen here, would be kind of a downsampled post-processed version of the image. So I'm using the words feature maps and images interrelatedly, right? Because I can be applying these layers to the image or to the feature maps. Okay, and so oops. What am I looking here? So, pooling. Oh, so this is a visualization of the ReLU. So again, I'm applying max or average. So pooling layers. So I'm just throwing away some. So I'm looking at the region, and I'm taking kind of for every, let's say, patch here, I'm taking the max value, and in the output feature map, just putting that maximum value. So this is basically downsampling of your input. And depending on the stride, you get a different size of the resulting feature map array. So typically in kind of architectures, you use stride 2 or 3 because you don't want to lose information. If you're going to skip over too many patches, then of course you might miss important information about your input image. Okay, and at the very end, so you have a softmax function where you want to convert the output maps into kind of probabilities that the input contains a certain class. So you want to find the kind of the class that would be most likely. So in this case, you can see that in the probability, the class both is the most likely class for this image. Okay, so this covers the different types of layers. So I don't know if there is any questions. This now would be a great time to ask. Okay, so maybe I will move on and I will monitor. So if you do have questions, please ask. Lots of different architectures, and there was kind of a trend in convolutional networks that sort of the deeper you go, the kind of the further you go, like sort of in time, right? The deeper your networks become. So I know these are different visualizations of networks from a paper, and a very popular paper by Simonian and Zisserman, and so that shows this. So you can look at this later. And so sort of as we went, so people have, so there's a, for image classification, there's a benchmark called ImageNet, and image classification, image recognition, and sort of as people have tried to beat different kind of previous works, so they design different architectures. And so one popular one is called VGGNet. And again, it consists of a set of kind of convolutions that are followed by fully connected layers. So large receptive fields. So receptive fields would be kind of a large area where, so large kernel sizes where they're looking at a large area of the image, and slowly as they progress, they look at kind of the size of the feature maps become smaller and the kernel size also decreases. Have a question? Okay. Why is it called softmax? Okay, Ilya will answer this. So the problem with these very kind of deep and heavy networks is that, of course, they need a very large memory size and sort of to encode all the weights. And because we want to be able to kind of train them, of course, we split. There are things that we need to do, that we need to split our data set into mini batches, which are essentially subsets of the data set that you pass, calculate the gradient to optimize the network. And so, recently, there has been a trend to also try to achieve different networks or design architectures that would achieve very similar results, but without such a kind of heavy architecture, so that you can apply neural networks in mobile devices, or maybe some applications where we cannot really have this much memory. So other things, or one-by-one convolutions, so different things that people have come up with. So maybe the filter is not two-dimensional. I'm looking at a different design of the filter here. Or a network in a network where I'm maybe trying to kind of combine kind of different subnetworks and apply them to regions, and then form a layer that way. So lots of different, again, lots of different things that people have tried to kind of achieve better results and achieve computational efficiency. So this is the part where I talk. So this is we need to go deeper. Do we really need to go deeper to achieve better performance, or maybe there are some other tricks that we can try? So Google LearnNet is kind of the key, is that there's an auxiliary layer. So again, a combination of a certain layers that would kind of form at every step. So we're not only classifying at the very end, but we're classifying at kind of intermediate layers. So this is not meant to be sort of here. I'm not trying to really explain some technical component, but I'm really just trying to point out that there's lots of different architectures people have designed for different tasks. For a particular application, typically you would sort of look at PyTorch and recent kind of papers and see PyTorch, TensorFlow, other frameworks and recent papers, see what is the state of the art, maybe find it in a library and just try it. So you're not really expected to implement any of this from scratch. They're often available in kind of deep learning frameworks that you use, but it's worth it just to understand kind of the general structure of the layers and what innovations people have tried to make new architectures. Another type of architecture is ResNet, and the idea here is that you have these skip connections, so you not only obtain a feature map, but you obtain the feature map and then concatenate it with your input image or input feature map, so that kind of so we can represent identity mapping essentially. And so basically the residual connections often add additional kind of space requirements, but can maybe capture more functions with their architecture. So these are the details of this texture. And if I look at the kind of different accuracies versus operations, so you can see the different types of architecture I talked about here with respect to their performance. So finally, before I conclude the neural network part, the neural network design part of this lecture, I want to talk a little bit about loss functions and how do we optimize networks. So I mentioned earlier that a neural network is essentially a function that I'm applying to an input, let's say image, to obtain some output, let's say a classification or into a set of like K classes. And so here I'm trying to kind of represent this function using a neural network, which is F star. Now to optimize it, I would like to kind of produce a prediction T and see how close does this prediction T match my input classes, right? So if I have, let's say 4 classes, which I had dog, cat, boat, dog, cat, boat, and I don't know, tree, my kind of y would be kind of zeros for the classes that are not there and 1 for the boat, right? Because we looked at the boat here, and t would ideally match this kind of distribution. And so one error that you can look at is this kind of squared error and just see if the predicted class values match the input class values, but it may not be very robust. So instead, maybe to improve the robustness, we can measure the model fit with respect to the model, so the fit of this F star neural network with respect to some sample of the data, and average it over the different examples I. So this is an example of my cost function. And so the design of the right cost function is really crucial, and it depends on the type of task that you're solving. Right, so some typical tasks that we may look at are regression, classification, or ranking, and each one of them has a set of different loss functions that we typically apply. So in regression, we have typically these squared error that I talked about, or Huber loss. So if we have some kind of boundary term, and if we're within delta, then we have 1 loss, otherwise we have another loss. In classification, the cross entropy, and in ranking here, I have the kind of loss. So if I have my example, I have a kind of an example that is like positive should be close to it, an example should be negative. So we want to kind of say that the distance to the positive example is kind of that is closer, and to the negative example is farther, and with some boundary. So for every task we have a different loss, and these again, so it's worth it to understand the equations, but again, they are often implemented in the library, so you just choose the one that is useful for your task. So what you really need to know is sort of for what your task is, how can you classify it in kind of machine learning terms, and what are the loss functions that are used in that type of problem. How do we optimize now that given we have a loss function? So different types of optimizations. Very popular one is called gradient descent and its variants. So the idea is that I have a function here, which is my blue dot, dashed line, right? And we want to come to the minimum. So for every point here, we find the gradient, and then we move in the direction of the gradient, which hopefully will identify as the global minimum of this function. And so how do we do this? We use the derivatives and look at the direction of the maximum change. Now, this of course assumes that your loss function, so that you have a global minimum. So of course there are maybe local minimums, which are not shown in this diagram. So there's lots of problems in kind of getting out of local minimums and finding your your optimal solution, which is your global minimum. And so as a result, there are many different types of optimizers and optimization techniques that will kind of take a specific neural network and then get it to your final solution. So kind of as a community, so in computer vision, machine learning, there's lots of tricks for creating neural network architectures, initializing them, adding normalization, regularization. So all of these different so as you would say, tricks of the trade, right, of trying to get them to work. And typically you would kind of borrow from different related tasks. You would borrow the same types of tricks. Now, data augmentation, what is that? So assume, let's say you have 100 images and your network has 100 million parameters. And so your 100 images, let's say they're 64 by 64. So the number of parameters there would be significantly smaller than what you have in your network. So to not overfit to it, you would instead do things like you would flip your images. And if you flip them, they still have the same content, but at least let's say for the classification task, but this would kind of create another set of examples that your network has to model and capture. So it's a way to try to make the networks kind of not overfit to a smaller data set. Cropping is another example of data augmentations. And other things are like ensembles of neural networks. So maybe you would train your network a couple of different times and average its results to get a more robust and stable prediction. So classification, I mentioned earlier, there's this ImageNet challenge, ILS-VRC. So people continue to benchmark on this data, even though it's getting kind of old at this point. So some design principles I talked about, we want to make hopefully efficient networks. We want to reduce the filter sizes, factorize filters, use these one-by-one convolutions to reduce the number of parameters and not use very expensive iterations. We want to not use fully connected layers, so I explained that they are very memory intensive. We want to use stride and pooling to reduce the spatial resolution quickly in every kind of block of filters. A block, I didn't explain what that is. So block would be like a collection of, let's say, convolution, pooling, or rectified linear units. So that would be like a block. So there are different definitions in every architecture what a block is, but it would be kind of a collection of these 3 layers, typically. We want to use skip connections and make redundant paths when, let's say, these residual networks to make sure that we can capture diversity of different functions. And of course, we want to play around. So depending on the task, on the application, the inputs, we want to play around with how deep, wide is a network to get it sort of to an optimal performance. Any questions so far? Everybody's really quiet. So how do we, let's say you have a network that is trained on ImageNet, and let's say it took you a couple of days to train it because of GPU resource, like limitations on GPU resources. Mind going back a slide. I can talk a little bit. So I don't know if, David, your question is about the design principles. So I think we will. I would be happy to share these slides, and so you will be able to go over some of this material later. And there are some links that you can look at to kind of. So this is kind of very broad overview. So there's lots of lectures and links that I included that you can look after the presentation to kind of understand this material in more detail. So how do we use a train network for a new task? Again, so we don't want to...
Yeah. Elena, there's a couple of questions. One is what is the meaning of playing with depth versus width?
So they are similar, right? So depth would be I don't have a specific, maybe there is some tricks that people know about depth versus width, but again, for me, it would be like which one produces a better performance. I'll play with both.
Gotcha. And then just a quick note on cardinality.
Miss cardinality, I didn't have a cardinality here.
So it's playing with depth versus the previous slide, last line. It says playing with depth versus width versus cardinality was the last design principle, I think.
Not
maybe
sure.
it was not on the design principle slide,
Yeah,
but
I'm not sure.
I'm sure there was a line that said depth versus width versus cardinality, and cardinality was in quotes. So I think they're just asking for a definition of cardinality.
Yeah, again, so there are lots of different design principles, which I'm not an expert on. I would sort of refer you, and maybe there's a specific technique that you're referring to, which I'm not familiar with. But again, I would suggest that you look at kind of the course notes for like the deep learning course and let's say the NYU deep learning course, and maybe there's a specific name for a specific trick that you would apply that you're referring to.
All right. So I think the last question is, okay. I think there are a couple of questions in the Q&A as well. I'm a bit confused. How does a network know when to stop classifying an image?
Yeah, so well, it doesn't stop, right? So like, let's say you have, like, you're essentially applying a function. So you're running your image through a function, and your function is represented by all of these different layers. And so once you've finished executing the function, you will get kind of a feature vector that represents your your class probabilities. And so there's no really kind of end time and stop time there. And then there's a question, can we use L1 regularization or L2 regularization logistic regression? Yeah, of course. So you can use any type of regularization. So if you want to kind of not sort of necessarily L1 might have like large outliers, you may want to use L2. Lots of different things that you can use. Again, it depends on your type of data that you're using and what you're trying to do with it. Go ahead. I think Kishan Shah has a question.
Sorry, I accidentally unmute you and mute you when you start talking. I'll stop.
So like, can you explain like how does relate to like image processing? Once you go to like Snapchat, you like customize your picture. So how does it relate to like yeah.
So I'm not quite sure I understand the question. How do you apply this like these
image processing?
So let's say you have Snapchat, right? You have
Yeah.
like an image there of yourself, and so you want to. I'm not an avid user of Snapchat, but what are you trying to add? Like you're trying to add a filter to it or something.
Yeah, filter.
So here I want to, let's say, well, you have like a picture of a person, right? You want to identify where first of all, who that person is, right?
Yeah.
So you would then apply sort of let's say a network, like a neural network similar to what I described to perform that task. Now, if you wanted to, let's say, not say who that person is in the image, you wanted to instead segment kind of boundaries of where the person is. So then you would use a kind of a different architecture where for every pixel in your image, every location, you would output like a probability value of whether the pixel contains a person or it contains a background.
Okay. Yeah.
And I will have some visualizations like in a few slides that kind of show different tasks, not just classification. So classification is just a kind of a simpler task to explain, and so that's why we use it for for kind of explaining your neural networks. But of course, it's not. They are used for many different applications and tasks. Any more questions?
I think we're good.
We're good, great. Okay, so I can now get to what is the order of the blocks. Again, so I think I covered a little bit of this. So there's no specific order, right? So every block would have a particular architecture, and hopefully your feature map will get smaller and smaller, at least for the classification until it kind of gets to a low dimension. And so when I was explaining about combinations of kind of the different CNN layers, so you would have the convolution, then you would have I guess you would have a ReLU and maxpool, or the other way, I guess maxpool and ReLU. It doesn't really matter, right? Because you can interchange maxpool and ReLU, get the same output. Why ReLU after a conv layer? So that part we covered earlier. So ReLU is the nonlinear layer. So convolution is a linear layer, represents a linear function. So you want to add nonlinearity so you can capture kind of more complex patterns. So if your function, let's say classification function, may not be linear function. So you need to add this ReLU to be able to represent it. Okay, so design principles, we looked at this. how do we fine tune? So the idea is that we take a network that is trained on a data set, then use the layers, most layers, and then kind of freeze the layers, treat it as a feature extractor, and then just fine tune a last fully connected layer for different tasks. Maybe if you don't have, again, if you don't have a large data set, or you're just trying to quickly produce results for another task. So, and then we can also fine tune, of course, the whole network. So we can use so we can use one data set to kind of initialize the weights and maybe fine tune on a different task, or combine the two different data sets. So lots of different tricks that you can try here. So here I have an example for a different task for image captioning. And here the idea is that I want to take an image and then I want to produce kind of a metadata, set of text explaining what this image contains. And so here we can take the fully connected layers from, let's say, classification network, and add a language model at the end and just train the language model. So there will be another whole lecture about how you can apply neural networks to NLP tasks. And so lots of interesting information there. So you can ask more specific questions there. We have a question. So how do we know if when it's a nonlinear to use ReLU, or how it's linear, and does using fully connector aid nonlinear estimation more? So again, fully connected layers are kind of an example. So they are equivalent to convolutional layers. So you can change every fully connected layer to a convolution. They're both linear layers. They just have different amount of information they can represent depending on their parameters. Now we want to the idea here is that for ReLU and these linear layers, we have a linear layer, nonlinear layer, linear layer, nonlinear layer, and so on. And that's whole basically I've been trying to explain. So if we just had linear layers, then you will just have kind of a linear function that you apply one linear function to another linear function, you get one linear function, and then so therefore we really need the ReLUs to not have that. So some history about CNNs, and so of course they are kind of a more, I want to say it's a recent trend. It's been an ongoing recent trend. So SIF detector, another popular kind of a key point and feature descriptor. So we would apply a set of oriented filters, take the maximum filter response, so here, and apply spatial pooling to extract the so-called SIFT feature for an image. And this is a kind of an image descriptor and a key point detector that was very high performing and very popular before neural networks kind of overtook this trend, or overtook the field. Another one is spatial pyramid pooling. So we can have these kind of visual words, which may define, we can extract somehow, take the maximum response to apply some pooling and obtain again an image descriptor. So all of these different types, so different types of descriptors, neural network, or these kind of so-called handcrafted methods, are ways to represent the image content. So that's why we call them image descriptors. Neural networks, there are, of course, lots of parallels to the biological visual system. So visual cortex, human brain, part that tries to process and explain images, consists of a hierarchy of cells. And so there has been lots of work in trying to model sort of which components of the brain correspond to which components of the network, and how are the kind of human brain decisions made, and how the neural networks kind of arrive at their decisions, and what are the similarities and differences. So other types of neural networks are like the neocortex neutron, which is a multi-layered artificial neural network posed by Fukushima. And so it was applied kind of in 1979 to Japanese head character recognition. So lots of prior work. And I should mention, so I would kind of encourage you to look at the, I would encourage you to look at these links to obtain some kind of more information. So lots of different, so lots of prior work here to get where we are now. So another network by Yann LeCun and his colleagues. Yann LeCun is a professor at NYU, among other his appointments. So here he designed the network architecture called LUNET, which was applied to digit recognition from NIST, a very popular classification architecture, a classification data set, digit classification data set that is used for like benchmarking different tasks. So again, I would encourage you to look at some of these older papers to see the motivation for design of these architectures and how, and kind of compare to what the field has moved now if you want to learn more about computer vision history. So now I want to talk a little bit about other tasks. So I mentioned image classification, but of course there are other things such as object detection. So maybe we, or other tasks that I will talk about. So here, instead of saying that, oh, this image has a horse, we want to actually identify where the horse is and where the other objects are. So I want to, in object detection, I want to output a set of bounding boxes with probabilities that the, let's say this boundary box has probability 99% that the box has a person, and so on. So other things are instance level segmentation. So I want to identify, so I have 2 motorcycles and 2 people here, but I want to segment every individual kind of example or instance of the object from the image. Other tasks such as matching and retrieval, again, so neural networks in computer vision and other tasks, they are feature descriptors, so you can use these features for to explain in a compact way what the image contains, and then try to browse a large image collection. And this is basically what Google search that I mentioned earlier does. So it just takes a whole set of images and tries to retrieve images that are similar. And last but not least, I want to, so again, I've included some links in the last slide, but in particular, I want to show some demos again. So one of the cool things about computer vision is that you have a lot of visual tools that will help you understand how networks work, and these are very useful as you're playing around. So this is a demo from TensorFlow, a framework, and one of the different frameworks that you can use for design of neural networks. And so here, I'm essentially, I have a data set of points, not images, but features, and then I can look at the different kind of properties of the input data set that I have, how much trained data split, how much noise I can add or I want to add, and how like design a different architecture and kind of look at the training. And so these are the different hyperparameters that you can, so activation ReLU, let's say no regularization, problem classification, right? And so it's kind of a cool visualization of how the training progresses and how the landscape of your output sort of for every point, like what is the network, how is the network classifying it? So this is my test data. So it seems like the network has learned and like converged So things like training loss, testing loss, these are some things that you would often monitor during training. So you would plot for every mini batch or for every epoch average of mini batches. You would plot your training loss and see like whether the network has stopped training, and so then you can stop the optimization process. And so you want to see how if the training loss is progressing. So now it's some numerical instability here, and you want to see if the sort of what happened to your validation loss, and then stop. And after the kind of you're happy with the results of your validation set, then you move on to your testing loss. And anyway, so this is a demo that you can kind of continue playing around with, just to get the feeling of sort of how everything changes. URL please. Here, oops. And I'm posting a bunch of different links. It seems like you don't have the access to a slide now. So a bunch of different links that I would, so from the last slide. And specifically, you like to understand kind of the different neural. So there's lots of questions about how to design the right network architecture. So I would really suggest you look at this deep learning course from Alfredo Candiani here. He's a assistant professor at NYU, and we have a really insightful course about how introduction to deep learning. So I would highly encourage you to look at it. It's the last link. And so with this, I will kind of end my lecture, and I'm happy to kind of go over any questions you have or other parts, or otherwise we can continue playing with the demo.
All right. Thanks a lot, Elena. And we have some time for questions and to discuss any part of the lecture which raised some concerns, so in slide. So please go ahead once we have some time.
The other demo, Conv.js. And I think here you can design your own architecture, which I'm not going to try, but I guess I'm trying to model different data distributions. So here the idea is that you can, I guess, design a neural network in JavaScript and then directly apply it. So again, browser applet.
Yes, I guess this demo gives very nice intuition that the network converts or transforms the input image into some representation in 2D space, which we can see below. And given the nonlinear architecture, we can make it separable into these two classes. Okay, we have some question. If I have a data containing, let's say, people with heart disease, and people without heart disease, and people with heart disease and COVID, it looks like the question is not complete. Sumbo Marcus, you can go ahead and speak without typing the question if you want. Okay, now the continuation. I want to classify these images. In your opinion, what's the best architecture?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So how, given that I've talked mostly about images of natural images of things that you see on a daily basis, how can we apply, how do we find the network architecture for medical imaging? And so medical imaging is a task of analyzing images from medical devices, right? So here you can, of course, take the existing architectures, let's say the ones that I talked about, GG, and just try them. And that's what a lot of people do. And you can also see if you can. So that's what I would do. That I would start with existing architectures. I would also look at papers that maybe related on the task that you're trying to solve, whether there have been other papers and people designed their own architectures and found that they work. And when you have an intuition of sort of what works and doesn't work on your data set, then you can again do this analysis, like maybe add additional feature maps, like play with depth width and other things that we've talked about.
I can also just add very, very small details that by the end of this week, we will have a lightning talk from Nan Wu. And she's working on this medical image processing a lot as part of the Krzysztof group here at NYU. And she actually will tell for a while about all the different applications of computer vision models into such tasks. Because for instance, getting to this hair disease problem, we can think of one of the potential issues is the imbalance of the output classes. You can think of that you may have some very small but high quality set of images where you actually have confirmed hair disease. On the other hand, you may have much more images with non-confirmed hair disease, or maybe some kind of low probability of that. And actually the major problem is how to make efficient learning with such sophisticated data collection process. And yep, I think other than that, Elena gave some very nice kind of ways to look into. Yep, and we also have one more question, also on medical field. What are some of the struggles when it comes to identifying evolving images like tumors or other mutations? I guess that's on the level, yeah.
Yeah, so this is again a great question because I'm very interested in medical imaging. So how do you, so you want to model change, right? So you may, of course, compare images visually, or you may sort of take images at different time points and have a neural network output, like sort of, kind of segment them or produce different feature maps and then try to compare, those and see if the images have something different between them. So short is that you need some way of comparing them.
All
and and I wanted to show for actually from my own work. So this is an example of task of a task in medical imaging where we're trying to identify. So this is like a cut, like this is skin, and this is a computer tomography cut, like a patch of a computer tomography image. And the idea here is we are trying to segment the region that is shown in red. It's not visible. Oh, whoops, sorry.
No, we can see it.
Oh, you can see my screen?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, great. So so you could see that qualitatively this problem is very different from sort of identifying where, like the things that we've talked about today. And so I mean, we sort of in this problem we've applied existing architectures and then just tried to figure out like how do we adapt to the challenges of this data to find out what is the best architecture that we can design and how we can train it efficiently. In terms of how to resolve class imbalance, so this is not specifically a problem in medical imaging, it's a more broad problem. And so you can, one way is you can just, so in every mini batch, you can have like, you're selecting examples for that mini batch, and then you can, for classes that have a low probability of occurrence, then you can just sample those classes more often so that your training data is kind of more or less balanced. So you basically show the examples that are less frequently occurring more often.
All right, I think that's it for now, but we still have some time. So any other questions? Okay, we have something else. Which criteria do we use to classify image? Okay.
So I think, so if you look at the slides, I will present one more time. So this is my architecture, right? And so after the fully connected layer, I would have in this network, I would have 4 values, right? And 1 for every class. And once I've applied my softmax, I will just take the one that has the maximal value. So here I took the class which had a value 94, which corresponded to both. So this means the network has classified the image correctly.
Yes, so I guess we can also say that we kind of use maximum score kind of a model where in the end, for every class, we have some class embedding, which was learned as a weight of the neural network. And we have the output representation produced by the network itself. And then we compute the dot product scores of every class and the representation of the input. And then, as Elena just said, we select one with the maximum score. But for the ease of learning and to make this maximum likelihood approach, we also apply softmax to make it a probability distribution. And is there any more question we can get? Maybe someone want to just stick
There's
it out?
a raised hand.
Oh, I don't see it actually.
Attendees. Yeah, there is a raised hand. There's. Can I allow? I'll allow him to talk. Okay, Sadman.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just had a question about like the painting example. So I guess like through like the slides, I can get like how we can like specify objects in a picture. But I was thinking like how can we like turn like an image into like a painting, like the example you showed.
This one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a trick, right? So I think in this paper, and I've read it kind of a long time ago, but I think it looks at the correlations between different areas of the image and the feature map, and if there are certain correlations, like certain correlation values, then they exhibit in a certain pattern. And so the idea is to kind of use the transform the input image to have kind of similar correlations and similar properties. So basically, so kind of in a more high level. So there are certain relationships between pixels, right? So let's say this sort of these pixels are blue, but they have, they're related in a certain way, and we want to transfer that. I guess, I'm sorry, this is the painting that we're trying to capture, right? So these pixels are blue and there's a yellow here, right? So we're trying to kind of make this image have the same properties that are defined mathematically. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you would need to look at exactly the mathematics that are explained in the paper, but it's a trick that you apply.
And I think if you want to read more, you can Google something like deep dream. There was so much hype about this thing back in the day. And I think there's hundreds of blog posts and examples how this deep dreaming worked out. So yes, please go ahead. We encourage you to read more about that. And we still have some minutes for more questions while the lecture ends. Please go ahead if you have some.
And thanks for all of the existing questions. They're pretty insightful. So I think we have two questions. One is from Hector. So how, more general question, self-driving cars, do self-driving cars use these neural networks too? And if so, how so? So again, self-driving cars kind of is an application domain where probably, again, I don't know much about self-driving cars, but kind of given the fact that kind of a lot of computer vision tasks right now, kind of this state of the art has been achieved with neural networks, I would imagine that lots of these there's lots of segmentation and classification and other problems in self-driving cars, and it would make sense to use neural networks. That said, in kind of self-driving cars, you imagine you have a kind of a car that's driving, so you really need to make decisions fast. You need to kind of adapt your network to what you see, and you need to make kind of it robust. So there are some challenges about adapting these techniques. So kind of, do you retrain if your training data is about images during the day and now you're driving at night, so what happens then? So there are also things like safety, right? So I haven't really covered this, but if you basically change networks tend to be brittle. So if you take an image and then you change a few pixels in it, then it might predict something completely different. And so kind of the key part about this is that you need to make sure that you trust neural networks. And there is a whole field about fairness, explainable AI, and bias analysis to sort of understand where networks, what they learn, and sort of how, when can we trust them. And many times you'll hear the term black box model. So that means that, so we kind of understand that you have these layers that are connected, but we don't really have a very good intuition, like how does the network actually make its predictions. And so this is why there's some hesitation about applying neural networks in fields like self-driving cars, in medicine, other applications where, since we don't really know when these models work and when they will fail, we cannot really trust them kind of 100%.
And just a small note on the self-driving cars, again on Spot, by the end of the week, we will have a lightning talk by Sinjin Resnick, who spent some time at NVIDIA working on self-driving car problems. Definitely make sure to attend, because he will probably go a bit into what kind of problems which Elena just highlighted are specifically addressable by deep learning architectures there. And there is one more question, which is there a means of predicting events after an image based on similar events? Well, I guess we can reformulate that kind of, if we maybe have some event which was pictured with an image, if we can predict future events based on that, like forecasting. Not really sure what that question means.
Maybe it's something like, so, let's say you have a video stream, right? And you maybe kind of use kind of images earlier in the video to make decisions about images later, right? So this is just an example, right? So if you have some prior knowledge that what you've seen, can you apply it in the future? Yes, so you can sort of, well, I mean, the whole neural network like training pipeline, right? You're training on images to obtain some sort of way to classify or make decisions about them later, right? So if you've like learned to figure out or distinguish different breeds of cats, then hopefully once you see another image of a cat, you'll be able to classify it. But if you train only on cats and now you see an image of a dog, then you will not be able to understand sort of what breed that dog is, right? So sort of so yes, you can use prior knowledge. You can use prior knowledge in other ways as well, kind of, and that's outside of the scope of this lecture, but because it's a kind of an ongoing, I guess, ongoing work, right? Or ongoing research domain. Another question is, can you discuss once more image class problem? Do you generate synthetic images or any better robust methods? So again, this is a great question. So I sort of, my first you can do both, right? So you could, if you have an imbalanced data set, you could just start by modifying your procedure in which you feed in the data into the network. And so let's say you have, again, 2 images of cats and 5 images of dogs, right? So you can feed in or let's say 2 images of cats, 4 images of dogs, right? So you can feed the cats images twice as often as dogs, right? So let's say your so the sampling probability for cats will be twice as much as for dogs. Now, if that for some reason doesn't work, you're not satisfied with the results, of course, you can kind of add more sophisticated techniques. You can generate pictures of cats. So you have 2 real cats, 2 fake cats, and then dogs, or some other perturbation of the above. But kind of the most simple way I would sort of generating synthetic cats is probably more difficult than just modifying the sampling probabilities of how you feed in the data. And I didn't really cover in this talk about how do you like do mini batch training. So again, so if you have a data set of millions of images, so you cannot feed these millions of images at once into your network. So you would essentially take, let's say, 64 images at once, which is 64 is the parameter, it's called a batch size, and feed those into your network, and then kind of calculate the loss and then propagate the loss back to optimize the network. So the way how you select those 64 images kind of is up to you, and so then you can do the sampling or something else to make sure that you have a more balanced distribution that you're learning. How do you pick the image? Because they're all vectors, how to differentiate dog vector from cat vector. So your training data has annotations. Well, I mean, in supervised learning, right? So you basically use the annotation to perform the sampling. So essentially you would have 2 folders, one with dog images, one with cat images, and you would look into your cat folder twice as often as for dogs to select a few images for every batch. So if you sort of, you will have the, like in your labs, you will have tutorials. And so I think in PyTorch, it's something called data sampler. I'm not an expert, but so you can just, maybe others can correct me if that's not the right way to call it, but you can kind of read about how to actually implement it, and maybe that will become a little bit clearer.
I think you're right, yes. In PyTorch, there are scheduled samplers where you can define the distribution over classes, which will be used to subsample some of them more often than the others. So that's one of the ways, indeed. Mm-hmm. And we have... So, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to read the question, so you can read it.
Okay, I just wanted to say we need to wrap it up. And we have some question about the recommended tools for beginners who wants to get started. I would say, please go to office hour. We can discuss this in a kind of more informal way there. Well, where can you start? And we have one thing in the chat. Are there any other resources outside of the ones you gave us that we can utilize to better understand AI?
Or image classification in Q&A?
I guess so, yeah, I guess, because since that was the scope for this lecture.
Yeah, I would highly recommend taking some, like looking at the courses. So there are some links I shared kind of in the chat and in the lecture. So NYU, Stanford, like other universities, they have a lot of courses that are available online, and you can read about kind of in more detail about what the layers are and how to try things. Another thing that you can do is you can look at PyTorch or TensorFlow or another, well, these are 2 main frameworks or other frameworks if you like, and just look at their tutorials, which are usually very helpful in trying to understand how to design a network for a task. And so they have classification tutorials you can just run in, let's say, Google Colab or just on your computer. And so you don't really need some sort of specialized computing resources, something you can probably do like in a few hours and just get started. And I think Swapnil shared the Stanford course link that you can read about the theory. But again, so this is, a lot of this is kind of practical, right? So again, if you start with the exercises in the labs, or you look at the tutorials like online, then you will get probably a much better intuition about the different layers, components, tasks, things like that. It's a very hands-on thing. Is it a completely, we have another question about sampling. The completely theoretical concept can be visualized sampling mechanism. Yeah, you can visualize. So it's just a kind of a probability exercise. I'm not sure if we have time to do that right now, but it's just kind of yeah. Again, you can just read about different bias sampling online, and maybe there are some visualizations. I don't have them at the moment prepared.
And I think we need to wrap it up. It's we are out of time. Thanks a lot, Elena, again, and I think participants already thanked. It was very nice lecture, and we enjoyed it. And yeah, right now we will have the office hour. So everyone, if you have any more questions and you want to get some more discussions with us, and probably with Elena if she will be able to join for some minutes. But yep, we'll see you all there, and have a great day.
Thank you.